Hello and welcome to Class 2 of the Preparing the Shabbat Experience. My name is Rabbi Aaron Kleinman, Chaplain Corps, United States Navy. And in this session, we're going to focus on the Kabbalat Shabbat, the introduction to the Friday night prayers. So Kabbalat Shabbat is, by any normal Jewish standards, a very recent innovation. It's only about 500 years old. It was attached to the standard Friday night evening prayers by the great Kabbalists, the mystics of the holy city of Tzfat in Israel in the 16th century. From there, it spread very rapidly throughout Jewry. So whether one is Ashkenazic, Sephardic, Hasidic, it doesn't matter. There's going to be some form of Kabbalat Shabbat in one's liturgy. The goal of this session is to not learn the songs, not learn the tunes, but to understand a little bit about what we're saying and how this Kabbalat Shabbat can help us prepare for the Shabbat experience. So what is Kabbalat Shabbat? It is a session of 8 songs and 1 song. They're done before the evening prayers and after the afternoon prayers on Friday. There are a few different ways of understanding what the songs represent. Some hold that 5 songs represent the Messianic era, as well as the 8th psalm, where the 6th psalm represents the days of the week, and the 7th psalm represents the Shabbat day itself. Others understand and explain that each of the first 6 psalms represents the 6 days of creation, the 7th psalm represents the 7th day, and the 8th day is about the day of the future of the Messianic era. Regardless, there are deep levels under each and every one of the psalms, and we're going to explore just the surface level understanding. So you are going to need a siddur of some sort. Doesn't matter if you've got an art scroll, a Koran, a Sim Shalom, a JWB, it doesn't matter. There will be in any Friday night siddur or any complete siddur a Kabbalat Shabbat section. The one we will be using for this class, if you do not have your own or if you want to follow along with the exact translation that we'll be using, is the Ner Le'elef, the NLE Resources Kabbalat Shabbat Guide, available at the website on your screen. Let us begin. The first song is Psalm 95. If you're using the Kabbalat Shabbat Experience Siddur from Ner Le'elef, Psalm 95 is on page 8 and 9. Come, let us sing joyously to God. Let us cry out to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanks. Let us cry out to him with song. For the Lord is a great God, a great King over all the other powers. For all the hidden mysteries of the world are his, as are the highest mountains. For the sea is his, and he made it. His hands formed the dry land. Come, let us prostrate ourselves and bow down and kneel before God our Creator. For he is our God, and we are the nation that is his flock, the sheep he shepherds with his hand. Today, if we only listen to his voice. Do not harden your hearts as you did on the day you quarreled when you were tested in the Sinai desert. For your fathers tested me for naught, despite having seen all I did on their behalf. I was angry with that generation for 40 years. I said, they are a nation whose heart is strayed, and they do not know my ways. For I swore in my anger that they would not enter the land of Israel. So the song has a dichotomy. The first half, roughly, simply teaches us to serve God with joy, with happiness, with simcha. That is a contrast to the second half, which refers to a time in our history when we didn't. That time is recorded in the book of Exodus, chapter 17, verses 2 through 7, also found otherwise known as Parshas Vashalach, when we tested God coming out of the land of Egypt at the waters of Meribah Umasa. What happened was we didn't have anything to drink. We complained bitterly to Moses. Moses said to God, what should I do? God tells Moses to speak to a rock, to strike a rock with a stick. Moses strikes a rock with a staff. Water comes pouring out. The problem isn't that we wanted water. The problem is that we complained. God does not like it when we wank. We're supposed to have trust in him. We're supposed to serve him joyously. When we do that, good things happen. We don't, the opposite happens. Psalm 96. pages 10 and 11 in the NLE Resource Guide. Sing a new song to God. Let all the people of the land sing to God. Sing to God and bless his name. Announce his salvation from day to day. Speak of his honor among the nations, his wonders among all the peoples. For God is great and very praiseworthy, more awesome than all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols. And when you say this, whether you're doing it in the Hebrew or the English, at this point you pause briefly and then say, and it is God who made the heavens. The reason for that pause is in the Hebrew, it says, Ki kol ele hamimim elilim. It really means all the powers of the nations are despicable or nothing. V'Hashem Shemayim asa, God made heavens and the earth. So at that point, we're supposed to pause to show separation, because even though we're using the same name for God that means power, or with the lowercase p, powers, we're drawing a distinction between the creator of life, the universe, and everything, and paganistic deities. Inner and outer beauty are before him, strength and splendor in his sanctuary. Acknowledge God, families of the nations. Attribute honor and strength to God. Acknowledge the honor of God's name. Raise an offering to him, and come to his courtyards. Bow to God in the outer beauty of his holiness, and list the whole land before him. Let the nations proclaim that God ruled, that he established the world so that it does not falter, that he judges peoples fairly. The heavens will rejoice and the land will celebrate. The sea and the creatures that fill it will cry out in happiness. The field and everything in it will be joyful. Then all the trees of the forest will sing merrily before God, for he will have arrived. He will have arrived to judge the earth. He will judge the world righteously and nations with his truth. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs notes that it's not normal in the world to think of judgment as something that we joyously await. In Jewish tradition, it is, because God is the true judge. He does judge not just with faithfulness and with honesty and with integrity, but also with a tremendous amount of mercy. And at that time, when we see God's judgment, then we realize the justice and all the things that have gone before. God's moral law sets the laws of human interaction. So do God's natural laws set the laws of the physical world. Pages 14 and 15, Psalm 97. When God will reign, the world will rejoice. Myriads of islands will be glad. He will be surrounded by cloud and fog. His throne is founded on righteousness and justice. Fire will go before him and consume his enemies all around. His lightning will illuminate the world. People will see him tremble. Mountains will melt like wax before God, before the Lord of the entire world. The heavens will tell of his righteousness, and all the nations will see his honor. All the worshippers of graven images, those who revel in idols, shall shrivel, and all gods will bow to him. Zion shall hear and rejoice. The daughters of Yehuda will celebrate on account of your justice, God. For you are the loftiest God over the entire world. You are vastly superior to all their powers. Those who love God hate evil. He guards the souls of his pious people and saves them from the hand of the wicked. Light is sown for the righteous, and happiness for the upright of heart. That the righteous rejoice in God and express thanks when mentioning his holy name. So a few notes on this psalm. In the second line, he will be surrounded by cloud and fog. His throne is founded on righteousness and justice. Surrounded by cloud and fog. God's ways are inscrutable. We can't understand them. They're beyond human comprehension. The line, fire will go before him and consume his enemies all around, seems to indicate the pre-Messianic war, the war of Gog and Magog, at which point all the evil of the world will be destroyed. And finally, Zion shall hear and rejoice, and the daughters of Yehuda will celebrate on account of your justice, God. When we see God's righteousness and justice in the end days, then all of a sudden all questions will go away. All historical inequities that we could not understand, that we can't understand in the past, and we can't understand while we live through them, they'll finally make sense at that day. Pages 16 and 17, Psalm 98. A song, sing a new song to God, for he has performed wonders. His right hand and his holy arm have helped him. God has made his salvation known. He revealed his righteousness to the nations. He recalled his kindness and his promise to the house of Israel. All the reaches of the world saw God's salvation. Let the entire world cry out in song to God. Let it burst forth in song and play music. Play music to God with the harp and with the sound of music. With the trumpets and the sound of the shofar break out in song before God the King. Let the sea and all that fills it, the world and all its inhabitants roar. Let the rivers clap hands, the mountains sing together. Before God, who has come to judge the land, he shall judge the land with righteousness and the nations in fairness. So the very first line talks about he has performed wonders, his right hand and his holy arm have helped him. So the right side in Judaism has two connotations. One is power. It's the strong hand, the strong side, as it were. Secondly, it represents chesed, kindness. The left hand represents the attribute of justice and judgment. So God's performing wonders, his right hand, i.e. his powerful arm, and his kindness have helped him, as it were. Finally, the last line, he shall judge the land with righteousness and the nations in fairness. Goes back to the question of what's it mean to be judged. If you turn to Genesis chapter 15, verses 1 through 14, there's an interesting happening. It's called the Bris Bein HaBasarim, the covenant between the parts. What happened is God tells Abraham, then still known as Avram, that he was going to make a great nation out of him. The only problem is, at this point, Abraham is over 80 years old and is childless. God tells him, don't worry, your seed will inherit you, and they will inherit the land I'm going to give you. And Abraham says, how will I know that they will inherit it? A natural question, but nonetheless he's criticized for questioning God. God tells him to take a number of animals, to cut them into pieces. A pillar of fire goes between the pieces, and God shows him the vision. And God says to him, you will surely know that your children be slaves in land not your own, not their own, for 400 years. But afterwards I will bring them forth with a mighty hand and outstretched arm, and with great wealth, and the nation that enslaved them I will judge. So the question is that this is clearly a prophecy about the exodus from Egypt and the enslavement in Egypt. And this was all foreordained. How could it be that God punished the Egyptians? They were just doing his will. Well, the problem is in the judgment. When one is judged, can one come out clean? Of course. One can obviously be found guilty or not guilty. That's based on our actions. The Egyptians had a job to do, and if they'd stayed within the limits of what they were supposed to do, they would have been judged innocent. Instead, they went well beyond what they were supposed to do into horrific cruelty, and they were found guilty, and consequently their nation was destroyed. So when God judges the nations of the earth, it doesn't mean that they're going to be condemned to a negative judgment. The judgment could absolutely have a positive outcome. That's going to depend on their actions. Psalm 99, pages 18 and 19. When God will reign, the nations will tremble. He who dwells upon the cherubs shall shake up the world. God who dwells in Zion is great and lofty over all the nations. They shall thank your great and awesome name. It is holy. Power belongs to the King who loves justice. You founded honesty. The justice and righteousness of Yaakov you have made. Praise Lord our God and bow down his sanctuary. He is holy. Moshe, Aaron with his priests, and Shmuel among those who call his name. They called out to God and he answered them. He spoke to them in a pillar of cloud. They obeyed his testimonies and whatever decrees he gave to them. Lord our God, you answered them. You were forgiving to them and revengeful towards those who plotted against them. Praise Lord our God and bow down at his holy mountain, for Lord our God is holy. First line talks about God dwells upon the cherubs. What are these cherubs? We think in Western society of cherubs being cute little pudgy-faced angels with wings that go around shooting people on Valentine's Day. That's not quite the biblical or the Jewish understanding of the cherubs. We first encounter them in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, after Adam and Eve are thrown out of the Garden of Eden. God stations cheruvim, cherubs, with a fiery, ever-turning sword to guard the path of Return to the Garden of Eden. They are rather terrifying and powerful angels. They're also the figures that are carved onto the top of the cover of the Ark of the Covenant with their wings outstretched. And they do have the faces of children, but they are not quite the cute, cuddly little beings that are depicted in Western society. So why are Moshe, Aaron, and Shmuel specifically called out here? Moshe represents the prophecy. He's the greatest prophet of all time. Aaron represents the kahuna, the priesthood. He was the first Kohen Gadol, the first high priest. And Shmuel represents kingship. He anointed the first two kings of Israel, Shaul HaMelech, King Saul, and David HaMelech, King David. Psalm 29, pages 20 and 21 in the NLE Kabbalat Shabbat Siddur. It mentions God's name 18 times, which corresponds to the 18 blessings in the weekday Shemona Esrei. Originally, there are 19 blessings. The psalm also mentions the voice of God 7 times, which can reflect the 7 days of creation. It also can reflect the 7 blessings in the Shabbat Shemona Esrei. Either way, this is normally said standing and normally sung together as a congregation. A song of praise by David, a tribute to God, O angels, a tribute to God, honor and power. Give God the honor due his name, bow down to God in the glory of his sanctity. God's voice is upon the waters, God of glory thunders. God is upon vast waters. God's voice is in power, God's voice is in majesty. God's voice shatters the cedars, and God shattered the cedars of Lebanon. He made them dance like a calf, Lebanon and Syria like young reems. God's voice cuts through flames of fire. God's voice makes the desert tremble. God made the Kadesh desert tremble. The voice of God frightens the deer and strips the forest bare, while in his sanctuary they will proclaim glory. God presided over the flood, and God was established as king forever. God will give strength to his nation and bless his nation with peace. History from creation until today is often violent, definitely chaotic, and is an awesome, in the most literal term of the word, demonstration of God's power and his might. The end of times will be a time of peace, of completion, of wholeness. And that's what we look forward to in the Messianic era, and that is what the Shabbat is supposed to be a taste of. So the final psalm, representing the 6 days of the week, ends with a leaning in towards Shabbat a little bit. But before we get to the Shabbat psalm, we have 2 more things. One is a brief liturgical, almost a prayer, almost a poem called Ana B'Koach. It's very Kabbalistic in nature. It goes very deep. There are 42 words. The first letters of each word are an acronym for God's 42-letter name. And it's, Kabbalistically, it's brought that it should be spoken out in 2 words at a time. This translation that we have breaks it up in sentence structure, which is an easier way to understand it. Any real explanation of this will be far deeper than anything I can understand, and certainly than anything I can give over. So we will treat this one on a very surface level. Ana B'Koach. Please, with the might of your great right hand, overlook our shortcomings. Accept the song of your nation, strengthen us and purify us, O awesome one. Please, mighty one, guard those who seek your unity, like the pupil of your eye. Bless them, purify them, have compassion on them, and always bestow your righteous benevolence upon them. Powerful holy God, lead your flock in your great goodness. One and only exalted one, turn to your people who proclaim your holiness. Accept our prayer and hear our cries, knower of hidden things. Blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever. Now we turn to perhaps the most well-known part of the Kabbalat Shabbat service, Lecha Dodi. This is meant to be sung. It starts on page 26, goes through page 30. It's meant to be sung and should be sung. There are those who have the custom of breaking up into two different parts, the first 8 stanzas followed by the remaining stanzas, and some use different tunes for those two. So I have the custom to start with a more slow downbeat tune and then conclude with a very upbeat tune. And it doesn't matter if you like Debbie Friedman or Shlomo Clarbach or Sephardic cant or Hasidic nigunim. Sing it to the best of your ability. Sing it in a tune that is meaningful to you. We'll start with the refrain. Come, my beloved, to greet the bride. Let us greet the face of Shabbat. One can almost envision the mystics of Tzfat or the Talmudic sages walking in the field, greeting the Shabbat bride. There's a dual imagery with groom and bride throughout the Chadodi. The first and most common one is the imagery of Israel as the groom and Shabbat as our bride. Our sages teach that every day has its mate, has its pair. Sunday has Wednesday, Monday has Thursday, Tuesday has Friday. Shabbat came and complained to God, saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Master of the universe, every day has its zug, has its mate. Who's my mate? And God said, the Jewish people will be your zug, will be your pair, will be your mate. So in one aspect, this is a celebration of our wedding to Shabbat. Another imagery that's used later on is the imagery of God as the groom and Israel as the bride. So in some ways, we are God's bride, God's beloved. And the dual imagery plays throughout the Chadodi. The first stanza. The one and only God proclaimed both preserve and remember in a single word. God is one, his name is one, for renown, splendor, and praise. So there are 2 sets of 10 commandments recorded in the Torah. First is in Exodus, the second is in Deuteronomy. In one, we're told to shamor, to guard the Sabbath day and keep it holy, and the other we're told to zachor, to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So how can it be that it's given over in 2 different ways in 2 different places in the Torah when it was only spoken once? So our sages teach that both words were heard at the same time when we stood at Har Sinai. The second verse. Let us go and greet the Shabbat, for it is the source of all abundance. It was established from the beginning, from days of yore, and is the final result embedded in the original thought of creation. Shabbat is the goal of the 6 days of creation. The holiness of Shabbat powers the next 6 days leading up to the next Shabbat. The third verse. Sanctuary of the King, royal city. This, of course, refers to Jerusalem. Stand up and leave the upheaval. It is beneath you to dwell in the valley of tears, and God will show you compassion. The next verse. Shake off the dust and stand up. Don the clothes of my nation's splendor. Through son of Yishai from Beis Lechem, my soul is close to redemption. So the son of Yishai is King David. So any reference to King David and his offspring is reference to the Messianic era, because the Mashiach, the Messiah, will be a offspring of King David. The next verse. Awaken yourself, for your light has come. Stand up and shine, wake up, and speak in song. God's honor is revealed upon you. Now this is usually the part where if one is going to use 2 different tunes, one switches to the next tune. Be not embarrassed, be not ashamed. Why are you depressed and why are you emotional? The poor of my nation depend on you, as the city shall be rebuilt on its hilltop. Again, a reference towards Jerusalem. The next verse. Those who plunder you shall be plundered, and all those who consume you shall be distanced. Your God will rejoice over you, as a groom rejoices over a bride. The next verse. Break out right and left, and praise God, and we shall rejoice and celebrate through the man who descends from Peretz. Peretz was a son of Yehuda, the son of Jacob, Yaakov, our forefather Jacob, and Tamar. From Peretz eventually descends Yishai, thence King David, thence, of course, eventually the Mashiach, as a descendant of Peretz. So again, this is a reference to the Messianic era. And finally, we stand up, we turn, we face the rear of the synagogue, or west. We say, "Come in peace, crown of our husband, and rejoicing, and so too with enlightenment among the faithful, treasured nation. Come, O bride, come, O bride." And that is a beautiful song, which is the Chadru. Our seventh psalm is Psalm 92. And this psalm represents the Shabbat day. It's on page 33 and 32. 32, 33, and 34 in your prayer book. A song of praise for the day of Shabbat. It is good to thank God and sing praise to your lofty name. Tell over your kindness in the mornings and your faithfulness in the nights. On the 10-stringed instrument, on the lute, the song expressed through the harp. So the mornings are after the troubles past. After the troubles past, we have to remain grateful. We have to remember what God did for us during the dark, long nights. During the dark, long nights, we have to remind ourselves of God's faithfulness. Just as He's always saved the Jewish people, He will always save Jewish people. For God, you have gladdened me with your acts. I sing of your handiwork. How great are your deeds, God? How deep are your thoughts? A foolish man knows not, a naive person does not understand this. How the wicked flourish like grass, and all their iniquitous deeds blossom. It is only to destroy them forever. So grass is interesting. Grass grows very quickly. It's also very lowly. It seems to be everywhere, but it doesn't amount to much. So too the wicked seem to sprout, seem to prosper, seem to flourish. But at the end days it will be clear that it's just for their ultimate destruction. And at the end, they accomplished nothing. For behold, your enemies, God, your enemies shall be destroyed, and all their iniquitous deeds shall unravel. And my pride shall rise up like a reem, and I shall be drenched in pleasant oil. So a reem is a biblical animal that's something like a super ox. Think of a perhaps a longhorn steer, and multiply that by several times. And that's the idea of the power and might behind a reem. And my eyes shall gaze upon my foes. My ears shall hear of the downfall of those who rise up against me. The righteous shall flourish like a date palm and tower like a cedar of Lebanon. They are firmly planted in the house of God, shall flourish in the courtyards of our God. They shall continue to produce fruit in old age that will be robust and fresh, to proclaim that God is upright, my rock in whom there is no injustice. Again, the contradiction, the contrasting between the long-growing, long-standing, powerful, mighty cedar, which represents the righteous, and the grass of the field, which represents the wicked. It should also be noted that we take the Sabbath on with all its holiness and all its restrictions in one of at least four ways. One, when we light candles. Two, when sunset comes on. Or three, when the community we're in takes on Shabbat. Or four, when we say Psalm 92 in Kabbalat Shabbat service. So at this point, Shabbat is fully in effect. We conclude this psalm looking towards the Messianic era, Psalm 93. God has reigned, He has done Himself with grandeur. He is girded in power. He founded the world so it shall not falter. Your throne is established since creation. You are eternal. Like rivers they raised, O God, like rivers they raised their voice. Like rivers they shall raise their destructiveness. From the sounds of the mighty waters, from the breakers of the ocean, you are powerful and high, God. Your testimonies regarding your house, the dwelling of holiness, are very faithful, O God. May it be for lengthy days. At the end of time, the nations will realize we will realize God's involvement in His master plan throughout history. On that day, when all God's creation recognizes Him, that day, He will be one and His name will be one. Until our day that is completely Shabbat, I wish you and your families Shabbat Shalom. My name is Rabbi Aaron Kleinman, Chaplain Corps, United States Navy.